Great. Welcome, everybody. Really pleased to see everyone here today. And I'm absolutely delighted that I was asked to chair this very special event today, the launch of Solly's book. Solly and I have known each other for quite a long time. Maybe we don't want to divulge quite how long, but I know she's been a real source of inspiration and sometimes therapy for me over the years. We've had a lot of very interesting conversations about careers and lives and so on. So it was absolutely brilliant to see a lot of this written down in this book, The Solutionists. So first thing I want to say, Solly, is a huge congratulations for the book actually being out in the world, living its own life. And I think when I was reading it, I think what I really appreciated about it, and this didn't surprise me coming from you, is that it is, you know, it is upbeat. It's called The Solutionists, and that's a really important phrase and orientation. But it does not shy away from the scale of the challenge or the difficulties. Obviously, the huge challenges we face out there in terms of the climate and nature emergency, and also the personal challenges of working on this agenda. So, you know, it is certainly not glossing over any of those things. And I found it really useful combining those personal reflections with reflections about, you know, the big question about the state we're in. So lots to think about, which we will cover in the course of the next hour. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to you, Solly, and you can talk us through the book and the main messages in it. And then you and I can have a chat about it. And there's also, for those of you joining us, it's lovely to see you all. And please do join in the debate. The chat is open to all, so if you want to just say something in the chat, that's great. There's also a Q&A function, and you can upvote questions. So I won't slavishly keep to the most upvoted questions. I'm going to ask some of the ones that I think are interesting and less popular maybe, but do upvote the ones that you want to be asked as well. And I will make sure that I get to the most popular ones. So yes, feel free to be posting your Q&A as we go along. And we will finish, I promise you, we will finish before 1 o'clock. Great. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Solly. Lovely to see you, and tell us what your book's about.
Thank you so much, Becky, and massive thanks to the Green Alliance for hosting this. Can't imagine a better organisation for me to be standing here and talking about solutionists, because Becky, you've been a solutionist who I've respected for pretty much my entire adult life, which is how we've known each other. And the Green Alliance, of course, has been a home for solutionists across all parts of our economy. Now, the book, The Solutionists, has got the subtitle around how businesses can fix the future. And it's a business book, which, by the way, as I've discovered online on Amazon, not that many women write. So I'm really pleased I've written one. But as I make clear in the introduction, so much of it is for solutionists from other sectors, from politics, from civil society, from academia, not least because there's more solutionists outside of business than there is inside. And so we really wanted to reflect, perhaps even a little bit today, about solutionists from different parts of the world. Now, I've been asked quite a lot about why did I call it The Solutionists? And yes, it is an actual word in the Oxford English Dictionary, and the definition of it is a solver of problems. So some of you, and I can see lots of friends and friends' names on here, some of you will know that for years I've spoken about being an optimist, which I remain being. I'm an optimist because that frame of mind helps me do things. That keeps me going, it pushes me onwards. My anxiety doesn't help anybody. My optimism makes me do things. But I needed a new word, because optimism is a frame of mind, and I wanted a word for a frame of action. And solutionist, to me, is more associated with doing things. And of course, the problem, as you say, Becky, is very inherent in the word. We don't need solutionists unless there's problems for them to solve. In the book, what I try to do is go into what it means to be a solutionist. I ask the question of whether solutionists are born or made. Thankfully, you can be made a solutionist. There wasn't much point in writing a book if everybody was born a solutionist. I go into how to develop your skills, how to become better. None of us are perfect at this. I go through what I call a 5-point star of the attributes, when I was doing all the post-it noting up on the wall up behind there, of solutionists I knew, of solutionists like Mads Nipper at Orsted, like Bill Gates, like Leah Penniman of Solitaire Farm, what I noticed about them and about how they act. I even looked through history at amazing solutionists, folks like Wangara Maathai. And I noticed that they all tend to have a really clear vision of what they're trying to achieve, but they're incredibly flexible about how they achieve it. They will, without apology and without very much regret, dump strategies and plans that they had if they're not helping them fulfill their vision. It's not something which everybody does. Lots of people become very adhered, very connected and disinclined to put down their plans, even if they're not working. Solutionists are very flexible. They tend to have grit as well. They will never, ever give up in how they work towards their vision. They tend to have fun and be positive. The amount of like you can't write laughter in an interview in a book, but the amount of laughter that there was on some of the calls when I was speaking to Christiana Figueres or even Hasebi-san, the head of Kao Corporation in Japan. And then finally, probably most controversially of the 5 attributes, I used the word soul. Now that was quite difficult. It's not a word we usually use in a business context. The word soul doesn't turn up on very many PowerPoints, should we say. But I included it because I needed another word for really, really giving a damn. So woke has got so many connotations around it, bleeding heart liberal, which is what people used to say, but just this sort of actual sense of really caring about something in a work context, because a lot of people care about stuff, but they don't bring it into work with them. So we go into that in some detail in the book, and I talk about how you can actually work on those parts of yourself, how you can improve those, how you can become better at it, how you can learn how to do some of those. But another thing which I do in the book is I go into the fact that all solutionists are not the same. We are not all cut from the same cloth, even though we've got these 5 attributes in common. On this call, listening right now, there'll be lots of different types of solutionists. Now, typologies are always a little bit difficult because they start sounding a little bit like your star signs. But there are different ways in and different attributes and different mindsets that people bring to being a solutionist. And I cut it down to three A's. I am an architect type. I like to see things from an international space station level I like to put massive schemas together. I like to think about how esoteric topics might connect with each other. The bigger and knottier the problem, the happier I am trying to think my way through it. But architects have some challenges as well. They can sometimes struggle to communicate their solutions. They can get in the weeds about the esoteric issues around it. And they don't always have the best soft skills in terms of actually enthusing and encouraging other people to come along with them, which is where the accelerators come in. Now, the accelerators are actually the unsung heroes of sustainability. It took me a while to realize how crucial this group was into change and how rarely we talk about people skills in sustainability and in social movements. The accelerators are people. If the architects care about systems, the accelerators care about culture. They create super teams. They do fantastic people development. They make sure that actually the right person has got the right job with the right skills at the right time. And they're really good at motivating people to get the best out of each other. They make people know that they're valued. And however, sometimes that can come with getting a little bit lost in terms of purpose because they're so focused on the people. And so that's why accelerators and architects work quite well together. And then there's the third group, which is the actioners. And if it wasn't for the actioners, nothing would ever get done. There would be very clear plans of where we needed to go. There would be really motivated teams, but nobody would actually do anything. And we'd just sit around in talking shops all the time, which, let's be honest, happens quite a bit in sustainability anyway. The actioners are the ones who actually go out there and get things done. Another word for them would be completer finishers. They're the people who build things, create things, make things, start things, maintain them, manage them, actually working through to seeing a fulfilled, measurable objective. And they are they get the best out of every situation. But again, like all three groups, they do need help from the others, because if there isn't a clear plan and a clear vision, the actioners will just keep going anyway, because for actioners, not doing something is worse than doing the wrong thing. And so what you can see, and in the book I go into this in quite a lot of detail, whether you're a big picture architect, whether you're a people person accelerator, or whether you're a get things done actioner, I go into how to make the best of who you are, and crucially how to make sure you're working with the other groups and have surrounded yourself with people who can complement your skills and not expecting to be able to do all of it yourself. Now, I think at this point we might be able to put up a quick poll just from those little pen portraits, very, very brief. I'd love to know who's on the call. Now, of course, lots of you will say, actually, I'm all three, or I'm a bit of this one and a bit of that one. Architects particularly will tend to question the paradigm. But so yes, if you're there going, oh, actually, I'm not entirely sure of this, you are an architect. But I'd just love to know which one, without there being any sort of comeback or marking, which one would you feel yourself more to be like? Because I'm really interested in our movement about how many people we have from the different groups, and particularly whether we've got enough accelerators amongst us. So that done, understanding that we've all got these attributes, understanding that perhaps we've got different ways in which we fulfill them, that we're not all the same change maker. Question I get asked quite a lot is, how do we make change? Now, one of the big things which encourages me enormously is the concept of tipping points. Now, in the sustainability movement, particularly in the climate movement, the word tipping point, the phrase tipping point, it has another connotation, losing the ice shelf, losing the Amazon, and what tipping point that will create for feedback loops, particularly in climate. There is, however, another type of tipping point, which is social tipping points. And one of the best bits about social tipping points is they actually happen really fast. Many of us, I think, carry within us this sort of assumption that change happens in this linear way, that it sort of becomes additive over time. Whereas if you look through history, when you look through major social changes, particularly about complicated things about gender, about family structure, about equal marriage, actually change tends to happen exponentially. It tends to happen at a tipping point. And in fact, there's social science very recently has actually come up with a number of what it takes to reach a tipping point, which is 25% of people. So just to read you a little quick extract from the book. Why 25%? That quarter number is much higher than some previous estimates of what it takes to really tip change. There are lots of theories about why we need so many other people to do something before everyone does it. The main one is the social cost to individuals of doing something new drops at that 25%. Before then, you might look weird or feel silly buying or believing or talking about something if too few others do the same. At 25%, you have safety in numbers. And eventually, after the 50% point is passed, the social costs works the other way. And now you're the majority. Societies reach this tipping threshold when the proportion of people deviating from the norm becomes large enough that even individuals who are risk adverse or conformist or have pessimistic expectations about the prospects of change have an incentive to follow suit. Now, how do we get to that tipping point? I go into lots and lots and lots of examples, from EVs to plant-based foods, and actually unpick exactly how those tipping points got there. What was it that took to tip? And there's two big things which I identified across all the tipping points: social, environmental, things which have got nothing to do with sustainability, which have tipped in society. There's two things. One, benefits. The primary factor in most tipping points is when enough people understand and accept the personal benefits from change, not collective benefits, not environmental benefits, but the very literal what's in it for me. This was a very big wake-up call for me in writing the book, of realizing that there are huge personal benefits from changing businesses, changing lifestyles for sustainability, but we tend to ask people to do it for the collective good rather than for themselves. And then secondly is perseverance. As solutionists, tenacity is our gift. And the research shows that tipping points depend on a group of leaders who persist in moving against the established equilibrium, even in the face of pushback. One of the things which I found most fascinating looking at the research is at 22%, you don't get a tip. At 23%, you don't get a tip. You can be so very close to reaching that magic number when change starts to happen exponentially, and you're still not getting any movement at all. I'm not sure what point we're at yet, perhaps around the 20s, but it's going to feel like an absolute uphill struggle until we reach that 25%. And there'll be probably no sign until we hit it that we have. And then just before I close and hand back to you, Becky, there's one other thing that I get asked a lot about being a solutionist, which is how unbelievably hard it is. So how difficult it is for all of us, and particularly those which we're trying to recruit into working on this. We have to be really honest with them. There's some challenges. It can be very difficult. It can sometimes feel quite dark working on these issues. And so I've got a whole chapter on self-care. And so in the book, we know what it takes to be a solutionist. We know what type of solutionist we are. There's loads and loads of examples about how change happens. But let's just remember, it's a whole lot of human beings who are making this difference. There's one thing which I want to just repeat to people, which is you're allowed to be happy. I'm reading, sorry, this is my copy with all my lip mark up in it. This is page 202. You're allowed to be happy, to rest and to enjoy yourself, not because doing so will make you a better solutionist, not because you need to rest the machine to keep it running, not because taking time today in order to work harder tomorrow, simply because you're a human being and joy is part of the package. Over decades working with solutionists, I've heard people encouraging each other to slow down and take care of themselves because they'll come back stronger, or to take a holiday because it can give you perspective on your next steps, or spending time in nature to remind you why we're doing this. Rest, joy, hobbies, holidays, all seen only in relation to our work performance. Even worse is when solutionists earnestly apologise for their own downtime, as if they might be criticised or thought of as letting the side down for reading a novel rather than an IPCC report, or watching a comedy rather than a documentary. I do this all the time. Ask anyone I work with how many holidays, if I take them at all, I frame as helping me become a better change maker, or apologise that I can't make a speech because I have to spend pre-booked time with family or friends. How many times I've had to be walked out of an office by colleagues quite forcibly, even though I'm sick. I promise I've made every stupid, self-sacrificing, martyr to the cause, live from my work excuse that there is. And apologies if there's anybody under 16 on this call, but why the fuck are we trying to save humanity if we don't enjoy letting ourselves be humans? Now, that whole idea came from a conversation that I had with Lily Cole, who's an actress and a model and an activist and an author herself. And I interviewed her when she was on her way to a funeral. And so she was really focused on how she felt on the world outside. It was a funeral of a change maker, about how he'd lived her life. And she asked me, well, why are we doing this if we don't enjoy living? And so in the book, I conclude, we deserve to be playful, rested, obsessed with our hobbies, happily distracted and indulgent to our loves, our relationships and our fascinations, even if that doesn't make us better solutionists, even if it makes us worse ones, because being messy, fulfilled, wonderful human beings is all this has ever been about. So, with that, I tried to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the big thinking and the structures, and there's business plans in here, and there's loads of examples of change, but also the fact that I call this the solutionists, which is about people. And so I do in the book try to go into a little bit of what it takes as a person to make change.
Solly, thank you so much. And there's so many directions this conversation could take. I'm definitely going to pick up the point about joy and how we enjoy our lives. Very interested in in this, what the different sort of personality types, if you like. I'm just going to start with a quick observation about the tipping points. Something that I find really hopeful is that this term at Lancaster Uni, I've been teaching an undergraduate course on energy systems, and I always ask my students why they're taking it. And the most common answer is because this is the space I want to work in. And that's, it's just brilliant to see that from 19-year-olds as they are, that they see this as something that they can have a career in and make a difference in. So that feels to me like a tipping I was going to say a tipping point brewing. Can tipping points brew?
They definitely can brew. Okay. They actually
a brewing tipping point. Let's have that. Great. So before we get stuck into questions, shall we have the results of this poll? Can that be revealed?
I feel like putting a bet on. Although then what the other thing which I found is that sustainability people don't always follow directions from something else in the book. So I'd be really, really interested to see who we've got.
Great. I can't see the results though. I'll tell you what, we'll wait. If we've got the results, can we post them in the chat for all? And I'll have a look at that. In the meantime, which one are you, Solly?
I am most definitely an architect. In the book, I go into much more detail, including the problems with being an architect. And of course, I had to interview accelerators and actioners to find out what they're challenged with. But writing the what's wrong with architects bit was very easy to write.
Okay, from bitter experience.
This look great.
Yeah, I think I'm probably an architect accelerator mix. Although certainly for my research, what I do is study acceleration, as in how do you actually turn from a plan like net zero, how do you actually, what are the actual steps you need to take, and what are the sort of very real people-based and system-based issues that you have in accelerating that change.
I'm really pleased to see the number of accelerators that there are on there, actually. It's one of the things which I think movements and teams really struggle with, is when they forget that it's about people, which again is hugely ironic when you're working in sustainability, where so much of this is so focused on people's behaviours, on people's beliefs. And yet architects, including me, tend to try to think about that in a relatively academic way, rather in an empathetic way.
Absolutely.
And I've seen empathetic people and how they make change, and I have felt hugely envious of that power, because of course it's very, very, very influential in how people act.
Yep. Great. So the results of the poll, I'm not sure if they flashed up in front of everyone. They flashed up for me, but we've got 38% architects, 26% accelerators, and 44% actioners. So that's a decent spread.
Yeah, right, everyone, the actioners. We've got loads of people who are doing it.
So basically, everyone who's on this call, stay on this call, and we'll crack it together, right?
100% done.
We've got the perfect mix. Brilliant. Oh, and we've even got, I'm just looking at the chat, we've even got a group watch going at the Grantham Institute, which means they can't actually poll in quite the same way, but they've got a good mix of the three as well.
Brilliant.
One thing, just in more general terms, Solly, I mean, one thing that I loved about reading your book, and I'm sure that these thoughts are going through the minds of a lot of people listening in today, are that reading a book like this allows you to reflect on your own career and approach, and think about sort of your outlook or your choices, which might have been quite implicit or unspoken at the time, and then you realize that there's a pattern, or you realize that there's something going on. So I think that one thing it made me think is that over the course of my career, I think I've become a lot braver, and that's partly because you gain confidence, but I think it's also partly because of the state we're in and the urgency of it. I am a lot braver and have frankly a lot less time for people who deny the scale of that challenge than I did years ago. So that's what I sort of felt from reading it. What was the main thing that you learned from writing it, would you say?
One of the big things I learned from writing it is that writing the book's really lonely, and I really like working with the team. That was one of the. I always think of myself as sort of being the kind of person who would quite enjoy writing books, and I do, and the process is fun, and it's interesting to have. I think it was John Ruskin who said, read books, it's people basically writing the very, very, very best of what they have to say all in one little book. And so that is what the Solutionist is. But the Solutionists, there was a lot of back and forward about whether we should call it the Solutionist or the Solutionists. And I went for the plural because one thing which came across whilst writing the book, which is a very singular activity, is how absolutely crucial it is that we do this together, and how we have to have really amazing networks and support each other. Now, that's going to be a bit challenging because I also surveyed solutionists, about hundreds of people, about thousands actually in the end, about what people get out of doing this. And of course, in the top 10, 9 of them were all about sense of purpose, being able to look my kids in the eye, feeling that my work matters. All the things we might expect. But the second one down, the second most agreed with statement was it's intellectually stimulating. So that became a little bit of a sort of meta moment for me in terms of thinking, am I writing this book because it's intellectually stimulating? Am I just writing it because I'm interested, or am I writing it because I want to make change? And that was something which I reflected on quite a lot, is about I really enjoy this work. I love working in the sector. I've worked in it my whole life, and I will work in it for my whole life. And making sure that you are fulfilling your joy and doing the things that you most love and making change in the way that you most want to make change, whilst also thinking about how you can best put your skills and gifts in service, was something which at the end of each chapter, there's exercises that I offer to people as ways to help them become better solutionists. I wrote those down because I wrote them for myself first. At the end, as I went through each chapter, I made myself do things, and I thought I actually only put those action bits at the end, right towards the end of the publication process, because I've just written this to-do list for myself about how to become a better solutionist. I better put it in the book.
Great, that's really helpful, and yeah, those I think they're really good to prompt those bits at the end of each chapter. Another question, this might be slightly left field, but how do you think we should deal with anger about the state of the world?
Yeah, so
because I feel that.
Oh yeah, fury, grief, despair. Like, you're a human being, you're going to run the gauntlet of all the emotions, and that's okay. I used to have a poster on my bedroom wall when I was a teenager that said, "Emotions are not a failing in a human being." Like, it's a little bit like with the joy bit. We don't have, the AI is coming. let's not try to be better at the AI than we are. And so anger and fury, if it fuels you to do more, is a really productive emotion. In fact, the psychologists would call it an adaptive emotion in terms of responding to something which is this challenging. If that tips into overwhelm, when you become so angry, if you're in an argument with someone, you can't even speak. If you become so angry, you can't even act. That's when taking a deep breath, taking a bit of a distance, and then coming back and deciding what you're going to do about it. So in all things, every emotion is okay. Of course it is. You're a human being. You don't get to decide what you feel. You're going to feel what you feel. It's what you do with that matters. And if you're spending a lot of time in an emotion that's just making you miserable and anxious and not helping you do anything, that's not helping anyone, including yourself. And so to think about whether you could move to another emotion, and if you're able to, and to think in a different way that is more productive, might be a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think that will definitely resonates with me, and I'm sure with a lot of people joining us today. And another thing that struck me, I mean, this is a Green Alliance event, and Green Alliance does a lot of work with business, but I think is probably best known for its work on governance and politics. So and you're the sort of mirror in that in that you work mostly with business, but I'm sure you dabble in government and politics. So from your standpoint, sort of maybe with slightly more distance than many sort of Green Alliance stakeholders, what do you think about the political world? Do you see solutionists there? What challenges do they face compared with business?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the line between business and government is less clear than perhaps it should be, and that, you know, a lot of business leaders are practically politicians, and as we've learned, a lot of politicians are business people increasingly. So there's a big merge going on there. From not actively walking the corridors that often of power, what I really miss is the actual solutionists, like the actual people stepping forward and saying, here are solves, here are answers, not sticky plasters, not dog whistles, but actual answers put forward compellingly and with authenticity. It has all become even more calculated than businesses are. And businesses are supposed to be calculated, and you're supposed to always be clear about the business case. And you're, you know, in businesses, it can be quite difficult to bring your heart in. Politics is supposed to be the opposite. It's supposed to be about people. It's supposed to be about answers. And I have to say, I am at the moment waiting and wishing for a solutionist to follow, to vote for, to believe in within politics. And I know that there are some, and I know that they do not get the profile or platforms that they deserve. But I think we very, very much need a solutionist uprising, a solutionist moment, someone who's bringing us actual answers rather than fluff or sound bites at the moment. And I actually hope that one of the things which I suspect is that politicians read business books. So I actually hope that perhaps this might fall into the hands of some politicians, but potentially even some of the younger ones.
Great, thank you. Yes, I think, I mean, my reading of that in a way is that politicians haven't felt able to speak out with a really clear narrative, with a really clear solutionist narrative about why doing this stuff is in our collective interests. You know, they've shied away from that, I think, and sort of gone behind the scenes and managerial to the extent to which they've done things.
But just to come back, it comes back to that personal benefits thing, which I just talked about. And maybe we're slightly to blame in terms of when we talk about the moral and the global need to take action. And we forget to mention how absolutely brilliant this is for individuals. How changing our diets will help absolutely slash heart disease issues, help you get a better night's sleep. How if we change how we travel, that it will make deal with air pollution. Like we don't talk about those benefits from taking action. We talk about this, that you should need to do this rather than want to do it. And again, I'm really looking for a politician to step up and say, we're going to do all of this because of the climate. But if there wasn't a climate reason for doing it, we would still be doing it because there's so many benefits.
Yeah,
that's the kind of message which I'm looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So I'm going to turn to some questions from our participants. So just to remind you, if you've asked a question in the chat rather than the Q&A, I might not have seen it. So if you've asked a question in the chat and you want Solly to answer it, please do paste it into the Q&A. If you do have a scroll through the questions as well and upvote, you see the little thumbs up sign, click on that and you'll upvote them, and I will try and answer ask the most popular questions, and we'll see how we get on.
I'm just going to interrupt because I did see people mentioning the name of Caroline Lucas in the chat, who is an absolute solutionist, and who I think a lot of people assume the Green Party is going to focus exclusively on the problems, which they do not. They have become over the years much more advocates for the solutions, which I think is one of the reasons why they're gaining in popularity, particularly amongst younger people.
And I know, you know, given what you say in the book about grit, I think Caroline has that grit, doesn't she? Time and again in Parliament, she stands up. Yeah, absolutely.
Grit.
Great. Well, I'm going to start with a question from Susanna Lansdell. She says, I feel a bit depressed that having started my work in 1991, that we haven't tipped. How's your gut feel of how far we have to go before we do tip? Hopefully not another 30 years.
So I've got two answers to that. One, which is the practical answer about tipping points. The other is about us and our attitude to when tipping points happen. So first is, again, that in the testing that the social scientists did, you didn't know, even if you were 22%, even if you were 23%, how close you were to the tipping point. I feel that particularly with some of the attitudes that I see and survey and research and listen to in Gen Zs and others, that we're getting very close to a tipping point, but we are currently missing one crucial part that would push us over the tipping point, which is storytelling and culture. So I go into that quite a lot in the book. We've got the economic systems mapped out by people like Kate Walworth and others. We've got the technology. We've got so much technology out there. We've got so many wonderful plans about what we could do when we started to tip, but we don't have the stories or cultural aspects, which is why I've just agreed to join the advisory group of the Hollywood Climate Summit about how we're actually going to get more of this into storytelling. And I've started working with social media influencers, obviously like TikTok and YouTube, mainstream lifestyle ones, not the green ones, in terms of getting this into culture. So I think that, Susan, we're probably getting closer than we think, but that doesn't give us a moment to let up. The second thing I want to talk about is how really, really depressing and sometimes bitter it can be for people who have worked in this for a really long time, because we're expecting to see an impact of what we do. Of course we are. We've worked our guts out. We want to actually see whether that makes change. One thing which I realized quite recently was I have to give that away. I have to stop expecting any self-gratification or any actual sense that I have achieved something, because if I do that, I'm fighting something 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times bigger than I am. If I try to look for feedback that what I've done has made a difference, I'm probably going to end up a very bitter person. I've got to do it anyway. That's the thing, which is by the time, you know, I'm pushing 50, by the time I'm 70 or 80, we probably will be at some of the worst of climate change. Even though it's going to get better and we're going to solve it, I will never see that. I am never, ever going to see the promised land. I will have to work my entire life on this, making the difference that I can make, putting all of my effort, all of my talent, all my brain into trying to do it. And there will never be any positive feedback that I will see that I made it. Just like every change maker through history. So the early suffragettes, they never got to vote. The civil rights movement never saw the first black president. It's like, if there's one thing that historical solutionists have taught us, is that you do it even though you never get to enjoy it. So that's the one thing I would say is put down the desire to see the impact of what you're doing and doing it because you're a good person.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to a question specifically about business, one from Marianne here. How do you think we can bring this out of the sustainability or CSR space and right into the heart of a business? So it's not on the nice to have, but becomes business as usual.
So this has been a question I've asked myself and worked with and gently bullied businesses on for years. It's getting there, actually. It's getting there because of a combination of factors. One of the reasons it's getting there is that a lot of businesses have realized that they're not the perpetrators, they're also the victims of some of the change that's happened in the world. And so the self-interest aspect has come in. Secondly is to stop thinking about this as a managerial approach. So net zero is super important. It's about managing down emissions. We also need an entrepreneurial approach. And entrepreneurial is about taking risks rather than trying to reduce risks. It's about inventing and failing rather than trying to always be guaranteed. And that's in the book. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs. I talk to a lot of startups. I talk to a lot of people who are building the businesses that will survive the change rather than trying to manage decline in those that don't. And I think that whole entrepreneurial side of sustainability, that whole making rather than reducing, creating rather than stopping, is something which needs to become as equal to the reduction agenda, if not greater, because that's actually why most people get into business in the first place. A lot of business leaders are entrepreneurs, not managers. And so the managerial mindset tends to bluntly sort of be a bit boring. It's the bit that they do because they have to. The other big thing that is going to change is we're in a war for talent, particularly in parts of the world where there isn't that much, where the old outnumber the young. Actually, you're beginning to see change happen simply because the young talent are no longer in entry-level jobs. They're now in middle management where they've got power and decision making, and that's having a massive internal change. Let's say the oil companies, 20, 30 years ago, there were surveys of graduating engineers, and they asked graduating engineers where they wanted to go and work. And the oil companies were the top of all of their lists. It's where the most exciting engineering in the world was happening. For decades and decades, the very best talent went to work for oil companies and extractive companies in engineering. Now, the oil companies don't even make it into the top 10. It's all tech companies that they want to go and work for. So I think that actually is probably the thing that's going to make more change than anything, which is talent divesting from employers who aren't making a difference, at which point you start to get poor decision being made in those businesses. They no longer have the smartest of the best. They can no longer invent and create in the way that they did. I think that's much more exciting and interesting than anything that's going on in terms of structures of change. I think basically they will essentially run out of road with the quality of people who'll work for them.
But just to follow up on that, what would you say, or what is being said to the people who do at the moment work for oil companies, or who are going for graduate jobs in in companies that are frankly not part of the solution, or indeed are in advertising, consulting, and working with those companies? How can we have that sort of honest debate with people about the impact of their work?
So obviously, with the wonderful announcement we had from lawyers, I think it was about a week and a half ago, the 120 lawyers who signed the letter saying that they wouldn't work, because of course it all got covered about the fact that they wouldn't prosecute climate campaigners. Of course, they also said that they wouldn't defend or represent oil companies. So I think you're beginning to see very big movements happening anyway. You've got things like the Creators for Climate pledge that's happening in advertising, etc. Actually, that doesn't bother me. In Europe and North America, it's happening anyway because people have got choices. It's a talent economy. What really worries me is the massive push for recruitment that some of those industries like oil and gas are doing in the global south. So they know they're not going to get the cream of the cream here anymore. And so they're really pushing, particularly in terms of salary and benefits in the global south. So that's something which over the coming years, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to and seeing whether we can work on making people across the world with really solid skills realize that they have choices about who they work for.
Great, that's super important, I think. And so continuing on the same theme, but sort of getting more to our own personal spheres, there's an interesting question from Karen, who says, sometimes it feels like there's a disconnect, the things we talk about inside the climate bubble, and it can be a struggle to connect and talk to people outside that bubble. How do we connect with and empower our friends and family?
So I've got a whole section about this in the book because we are a bubble, and there's a good reason why we're a bubble, because we're a community and human beings like to have these little groups where everybody has got the same sort of values and speaks the same kind of language. I've got a master's degree in Shakespeare. And so I've got a lot of friends who are in the Shakespeare bubble. They're all Shakespeareans and they all talk the same language about iambic pentameter and original voice and all these weird esoteric things. And that's fine. They can have their bubble where nobody quite understands what they're talking about because it doesn't have that much impact on the rest of the world. We do have to get out of our bubble. And as Professor Catherine Hayhoe, one of my personal sort of girl crushes says, is the most important thing you can do about climate change is talk about it. Now, talk about it, not argue about it, not browbeat about it, not have a massive argument with your annoying brother-in-law over Christmas. The very best thing you can do is talk about what you're doing and how you're benefiting from it. So remembering that right now, in terms of the amount of information there is about climate change, if somebody doesn't feel the same way that you do, it isn't because they haven't heard about it or because someone hasn't told them it's important already. They have other barriers or they have other concerns. So the very, very, very most motivating thing you can do is talk about how taking action on climate or taking action on social justice makes you happy, how it gives you a sense of belonging, how the community is really warm and welcoming, how you get better quality sleep, how you feel less guilty and less anxious. That's to basically sell the benefits of working and acting and caring about these topics. And that's a bit harder to do because it's a bit more honest, it's a bit more authentic, it's a bit more about you, it's a bit less about IPCC reports and stats and facts and winning the argument, and more about being real about why you work on it. And what you'll find is if you're real and honest about how you feel and about why you're scared and about what you're doing about it and about how you felt that really works for you and you feel better about it, you'll find people warm to you and agree with you much more than if you browbeat them with parts per million carbon dioxide.
Absolutely. I don't know if you saw, Solly, a really lovely initiative from Australia, a hairdresser who's running a training scheme for hairdressers to talk to clients about climate.
No, I need to find them immediately. I love that.
Okay, I'll send it to you. But it was just such a good idea because, you know, it's the ultimate it's the ultimate confessional, isn't it? The hairdresser, and a really good chance to have those sort of personal conversations. Just had a comment saying absolutely showing, not telling when talking about climate.
And again, we all like to win an argument, but we don't have to. Climate change is going to win that argument for us.
Yeah.
I had somebody the other day was telling me about a sort of brother-in-law's or father-in-law who was a staunch denier, etc. And she was trying to give me, she asked me for advice about how to convert him. I said, give up, don't. Take care of your emotional energy. Spend that emotional energy somewhere which is really going to make a difference. If you're speaking to a denier now in 2023, they don't deny climate change, they just don't like you, or they just want to have an argument, or actually it's something else that they care about and they don't like environmentalists very much. It's not about climate change. So don't have the argument. Give yourself permission to just nod, smile and walk away and go and spend your energy somewhere where it's really going to make a difference. And I think that permission to have the arguments which are productive and which are going to make change. She actually cried. It's something which all of us need to remember, which is we only have the energy that we have. Solutionists aren't machines, they're not unending. So use all the energy you've got where it's really going to make a difference, not where someone's just going to block you because of reasons other than the topic you're actually arguing about.
Yeah. So that comes on, there's a couple of questions I really want to keep time for, but one that I'm very interested in is coming back to your point about joyfulness. I want to ask you, Solly, what keeps you going, what makes you, what keeps your joyfulness up? But I also want to ask everyone on this call, so I wonder if we could do an absolute quickfire right in the chat. What keeps you going, whether it's within work or outside work? So if everyone wants to answer that question in the chat. And Solly, what keeps you going?
So I've just made a big pitch for being authentic about how you talk, and so the slightly clever answer I'd want to give, like in the book Christiana Figueiredo's, when I ask her exactly the question you just asked me, she goes into this really impressive and very moving piece around her spiritual journey, and other people talk about how they connect with nature when they go out every day and have work and all that stuff. I'm being really, really honest. Sci-fi. People are always asking me, what's the vision of a sustainable future? What's the vision? We don't have enough visions of a sustainable future. It's like, we have thousands of them. Like in the other room, this is a very carefully curated set of books. In the other room is my bookshelves full of science fiction, but I really recommend books like Becky Chambers' Psalm for the Wild Built. There is human imagination about the way that we could live outstrips our current situation 1,000,000 to 1. Everyone always says nothing can change. And going, we have so many visions of how things could change and how, and that's, you know, whenever I worry that nothing can change, I go and remind myself of how imaginative human beings are about what could change. That's really embarrassing, but it is true.
Well, you've got friends in the chat, Sully. Someone else citing Star Wars. You'll really know that you've succeeded as a persuader when you get me reading sci-fi. I'm a hard no on that, but you know, some really interesting
accepted.
some really interesting answers in the chat. Yeah, quite a few around. Someone saying little wins. Someone else saying when someone else has a penny drop moment, you know, those sort of when you see a little sort of micro breakthrough, and then lots of lovely things about what people do. Lots of mentions of dogs, swimming, walking, cocktails, a lot of mention of nature actually. So yeah, it's lovely to see those sort of out of work things which are connected to the bigger fight, what we're in this for.
I actually I'm going to spend the next couple of days with one of my nieces. She's 8 years old, and we seem to have this weird, even though human beings go through punctuated equilibrium where we have quite stable societies and they change quite significantly, and then we go back to quite stable societies, we always tend to have this really weird feeling that nothing can change, which is nuts. Like, I'm exactly the same age as the internet, which means that within one person's not that long lifetime, the world has changed fundamentally from what it was when I was born. And yet here we are saying society can't change. Talk to an 8-year-old about what they think the future will be like, about how they think the world might be, about what kind of work they think they might do. We have built into us as human beings this sense of change and progress and things being different and wanting to make a difference. Like, you know, talk to an 8-year-old about what they want from the future, and that's a very, very good way to feel motivated. Hi, Alana.
Thank you. So, I mean, on that point, so we've only got a few minutes left. So I'm going to cheat and ask 2 questions in one go. But there's a question on that point about things sort of not being linear, slipping forward and back. And this one is from Jeffrey Lean, who many of you will know, long-time environment correspondent and general hero. Hi, Jeffrey. And he says, it seems to me that one sign we may be near a tipping point is that we seem to reach it from time to time before then slipping back, like in spring 2019 in the aftermath of school strikes and demonstrations, Extinction Rebellion demonstrations. Another arguably around COP26, but pre-invasion of Ukraine. So do you get this feeling that we're sort of almost there and then back? Question 1, don't answer it just yet. And then another one, a very popular question from Stella Hall, who's founded the Festival of Thrift and National Festival of Sustainability, about the arts and cultures, the role of arts and culture in connecting and explaining, and do you see the value of that, and how do we get buy-in to that sector from other sectors? So yeah, a couple of questions for you there. If anyone has very quick questions that you think we'll be able to squeeze in, please do ask them, otherwise we might have to end there, but go for it, Solly.
I'll answer really quickly, although Jeffrey, your question deserves a much longer answer. And hello. Yes, I think the point about tipping points is that they tend to sort of tip a little bit before they tip. The question, we are unquestionably going to get a tipping point of change. The only question is whether it's good or bad. There's no way through. It's either up or down. And you know, we can bash our head against trying to get through for as long as we want before we decide whether we're going to go up and down. And I feel like after not quite as long as you, but quite a while of working in this sector, that I feel like that this is the closest to feeling a tipping point than I have ever done in my career. Question is, how long are we going to stand at that crossroads before we tip up or down? Because on lots of social issues, even though they cause untold challenge and pain, you can stand at that tipping point for quite a long time, causing misery, but without any definitive impact happening. On climate change, you can't. We don't get to stand at that tipping point for very long. We have got to tip it and tip it quickly, which is why I think Stella's question actually answers in many ways, Jeffrey, which is, as I said earlier, I think culture and storytelling is absolutely central to how we're going to get this. If anything, we've got the whole machine. I wish I had a more natural metaphor. We've got the whole machine ready to go. We've got all the different parts of it. We just have got to pour the renewable fuel of story into it to get it going. In fact, actually, as well as having my copy of The Solutionist on my desk, I also have my copy of Chapter 5 of the IPCC AR6 Working Group 3. And this is what came out late last year, Chapter 5 of the IPCC did, which has got a whole deep amount of work and thinking and content on it about sociocultural change and about the massively central role of arts and culture and storytelling and social influence and even advertising in making this change. And so that's Sylvia, that's industry I'm working with very closely right now. And I think we're going to begin to see more funding. I think we're going to begin to see more content and more advice, and hopefully really lifting the role of that industry up. Because when you think about it, it's the main industry that's made things done. We are Homo narrativium. We are the storytelling ape. We teach our children about the world through fairy tales. Like, stories are so much part of who we are. We have to get the story on this right. And one of the things, I have a massive argument with Johann Rockström about this. He did not like it at all. There's all this evidence that shows that human beings believe stories and anecdotes more than we believe facts and stats. And I'm afraid you can deny that, but then you're just a human nature denier other than a climate denier. We do believe stories and anecdotes more than facts. And at the moment, we have a poverty of story and an absolute lack of creative change making within our movement. But I think the creators are coming. They're on their way. People like Sylvia are already there, and more are coming.
Thank you. So I'm just, in the spirit of storytelling, I'm just trying to work on your analogy of a machine that you pour fuel onto, but I haven't come up with a better one, except weirdly, the thing that popped into my head was a compost heap that we're adding worms to, or maybe we are the worms. I'm not quite sure. But,
I think it's when I think about how I try to explain everything that's going on to my nieces, to Grace, to Winter, and to Alana, I don't do PowerPoints, and I don't write reports, and I don't even give them my wonderful books. I tell them stories about the people that I worked with. I tell them stories about Indigenous change makers in the Amazon, and about how they live, and about how they brush their teeth, and about how they go about their day, and about why they sleep. And I tell them stories about the people that I've met in the US, about the water protectors, and about the people who are. I tell them about the craftivists who are knitting. Activist symbols, people like Sarah. I tell them stories of people because that's what they're going to understand, that's what's going to motivate them, and that's what's going to make them to feel more hope about the change that's got coming. And perhaps maybe that's what we should be telling everyone, not just the kids, is the stories of the solutionists and the stories of the change makers, rather than all the facts and stats of the change.
Yeah. Well, Solly, I think that's a really lovely note to end on. I'm sorry that I didn't get through everyone's questions, but I hope I got to a decent chunk of them. Just buy the book. I think we're going to pop in the chat how you can buy the book. Also, just in the final minute or two, I would really recommend scrolling through the chat to see what people answer to the joyfulness question, because that in itself, we need to bottle that and keep it, 'cause it's a lovely account of how we all keep ourselves going. So just really remains for me to do the thanks. Big thanks to the people behind the scenes, to Solly's colleague Sarah at Futerra, and to Siri and Faustine at Green Alliance for putting the event together, doing the polls, making sure everything worked. It was couldn't be done without you, so thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who joined today. I think that sessions like this are really important in sort of collective motivation and feeling that you're not alone, and feeling that you are a solutionist, in fact. So thank you very much for everyone joining. A lot of thanks in the chat as well, which is lovely to see. And lastly, Solly, thank you very much to you for all that you do, and for even better for having written it down so we can learn from it. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the yeah, still sunshine. Go and enjoy the sunshine, everyone.